The Renaissance was a transitional movement in Europe between the 14th and 16th centuries. It was marked by a humanistic revival of classical influence of ancient Greece and Rome, which produced new developments in art, literature, science, and architecture. It was also a time of enlightenment as well as hardship. The Renaissance can best be defined as a period of reformation and expansion in literature, politics, and religion. This is due to the accomplishments of William Shakespeare and his complex plays that all audiences can relate to, Niccolo Machiavelli's definition of leadership, and Martin Luther and his 95 Theses. William Shakespeare's plays were complex and perplexing yet entertaining. This is due to the fact that he was able to investigate and write about the nature of human life and the mysteries of romantic love in such a way to make it so everyone can relate no matter what time. Some of these attributes included jealousy, midlife crisis, loyalty, and dependence. Shakespeare was a famous English playwright who wrote 39 plays between 1589 and 1613. He is still known as one of the greatest writers of dramatic work in the English language. It is complicated to know how some of the things in his life came to be due to the fact that he did not keep records of significant events like they do now. Before his days in the spotlight, Shakespeare was fortunate enough to get an education. He learned how to read and write. He read famous authors of that time such as Virgil, Plautus, Ovid, and Terence. It is believed that these authors gave Shakespeare inspiration when writing his famous works because Ovid, for instance, is present in Midsummer Night's Dream. He was never able to go to a university because he married and had 3 children. In 1589, Shakespeare started to write his first play. His plays consisted of comedies, tragedies, histories, and romances. By 1594, he was an actor, primary playwright, and partner in the Lord Chamberlain Men. Overall, his tragedies were usually known as his best works, especially since they survived translations, thus catching the attention of every culture in the world. Some of his most famous plays were Hamlet, Julius Caesar, and Romeo and Juliet. Hamlet was based upon Shakespeare's son, Hamnet, who had just previously died before the play was written. At the end of Hamlet, Hamlet dies, and in actual life, Hamnet died. In addition, Shakespeare is significant because he worked at a theater that was still a novel phenomenon. Also, he was one of the first men to earn his fortune with a pen, even though he earned more money from being a theatrical producer rather than a playwright. He was the most quoted author in the English language as well. For example, in the Encyclopedia of Shakespeare it says, "Shakespeare is everywhere among us." Shakespeare's works define the English language. Without him, other authors would not write as well as they do now, due to the fact that Shakespeare is used as a reference for authors. For example, some stories use a similar plot as to those of his works like Romeo and Juliet has a similar plot to West Side Story. Also, without him, the English language would not be where it is today. High school students read a variety of his plays, thus making them actively think and learn more about the English language. Therefore, Shakespeare plays an extremely significant role in the English language. Some famous quotes from Shakespeare's plays include the famous line from Julius Caesar, "Et tu, Brute?" and the famous quote from Romeo and Juliet, "O Romeo, Romeo, where art thou, Romeo?" It has become obvious that Shakespeare was a man who earned respect long before his death. Another great man who best defined the Renaissance was a man named Martin Luther. Martin Luther, an influential religious reformer, helped to define the time period of the Renaissance with his writing of the 95 Theses. Martin Luther planned on becoming a lawyer until he was nearly struck by lightning, and which brought terror. He said that if St. Anne saved him, he would become a monk. Therefore, when he came out alive, that was exactly what he did. Although, during his time as a monk, he was not ordinary, the teachings of the Bible had a great effect on him. He was taught that the only connection between a person and God was the church. The Bible states, "For it is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith." Luther soon realized that a person that is respectably upright earns the protection through faith in God alone. This became known as the justification of faith. After the justification, he noticed the misuse of indulgences, selling them and saying that people are rid of their sins if they bought them. Luther felt like he needed to do something. Martin Luther wrote the 95 Theses. The Theses attacked how the church was run, how the Pope thought people should interpret the Bible, and the choices the Pope made for the church. The issue that was stated the most in the Theses was how the Pope went about teaching the Bible and how he thought it should be taught. The Pope taught that if the people bought indulgences, that their guilt and sins would be rid of their persons, but that is not the case. The Pope cannot remit any guilt, except by declaring and showing that it has been remitted by God, or, to be sure, by remitting guilt in cases reserved to his judgment. If his right to grant remission in these cases were disregarded, the guilt would certainly remain unforgiving. 95 Theses, number 6. The Pope is not able to rid anyone of any sins. He can only show or tell a person that they are gone. This means that anyone's sins were not actually rid of their persons. Also, the cases that are specifically for the Pope, many of them he cannot rid because even though they are different circumstances, they are still sins and these will remain always unforgiving. This action of realizing the corrupt nature of the Pope made many people realize that Luther could have been potentially right with his criticisms. By this time, the printing press was invented, his theses were taken and translated from Latin to German so the common people could understand its content. They were mass-produced and sent out all over Germany. As a result of Luther's writings, he was excommunicated from the church and told to withdraw his views, but he refused. As a result, the Diet, an assembly of German princes, declared an outlaw and ordered his arrest. When he was on his way back from the Diet of Worms, Luther was kidnapped by Frederick the Wise, a friend of Luther's. During his seclusion, he spent a lot of time translating the New Testament from Latin to German. When he went back to Wittenberg, many people had joined together to form sects or groups, and they called themselves the Lutherans, later changed to Protestants. In the end, Luther kept helping with the basis of the Protestant religion and emphasized preaching and the teaching of the Bible. Martin Luther best defined the time period because of his dedication to change what had to be changed about the Pope and the teachings of the Bible. Religion was a very important part in the everyday activities of the Renaissance, and his fulfillment helped many people to realize their actual religious views. Martin Luther's theses changed the ways of the church significantly. Without Martin Luther, the people of Christianity would not actually know the true facts of their religion, due to the fact that the Pope did not teach the Bible accurately. In addition to Shakespeare and Martin Luther, Niccolò Machiavelli was also one who best defined the Renaissance. Niccolò Machiavelli was born on May 3, 1469, in Florence, Italy. Machiavelli was an Italian politician, diplomat, and writer, and is considered to be one of the most famous thinkers in the Renaissance. In 1498, he entered the Florentine Republic as a secretary and went on many diplomatic expeditions, including trips to France and Germany. After the Spanish defeated the French in 1512, Machiavelli was sent into a short imprisonment and was forced to give up his interest for politics. He soon began to reflect on political power and wrote books, including The Prince, which is one of the most famous books on political power in the West. His book, The Prince, is mainly targeted at Sir Lorenzo de' Medici, who was the leader at the time. Machiavelli wrote about human nature and political power. Machiavelli claims it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. He was basically suggesting that if a leader, specifically a prince, does not want to be revolted against, he would need to create a justice between the people who love him but do not fear him and those who hate him but do fear him. Machiavelli was intelligent and knew that the people who either feared or loved him would not revolt against him and would essentially do anything for him. His major concerns in The Prince were the achievements of expansion of political power as ways to restore and keep order during his time. Machiavelli's main ideas about politics came from his prior experiences with Italy's political problems and his knowledge of ancient Rome. Machiavelli was among the first to renounce virtue as the foundation for politics. Overall, he wrote The Prince in an attempt to influence the Medici family, as well as about how leaders should lead their people then and today. Without this expansion in politics by Machiavelli, the way people view literature and politics would not be the same today. Without these significant figures, life now would not be the same. The English language would not have a guide of excellence, Christians would not be studying their religion correctly, and it would have taken longer for leaders to maintain power. Therefore, the Renaissance can best be defined as a period of reformation and expansion in literature, politics, and religion. This is due to the accomplishments of William Shakespeare and his complex plays that all audiences can relate to, Niccolò Machiavelli's definition of leadership, and Martin Luther and his 95 Theses. It could be worse.
locked in here on my own, or like a stone that suddenly dropped.